In this episode, we're popping up to Bucks County, PA. Situated in Huntington Valley is the Naked Brewing Company, and the person brewing the beer there is Hannah Godhe. She's faced some trying times, but landed on her feet. Impressive, especially during COVID. Now Hannah and Naked Brewing try to lead the way in making craft beer a more inclusive industry. Welcome to No Pants During the Pandemic. Hi, I'm Gavin Brooks, and this is No Pants During the Pandemic. Today I'm speaking with Hannah Godhe from Southeast Pennsylvania's Naked Brewing. Hey Hannah, how you doing today?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Why don't we get started by you telling me who you are?
I'm Hannah Godhe, the head brewer for Naked Brewing Company in Huntington Valley.
And how'd you first get into beer?
I have loved beer for a really long time, but only since I was 21. We'll go with that. It really actually started when I was in college. My senior year, I did an internship, and it was a paid internship, and so I thought that I was just like rolling in dough, because I was a broke college student. And one of the bars in town had, right before senior year started, I turned 21, and one of these bars turned into this craft beer bar. And so they had started doing the passport thing, where you drink around the world. So I thought it was awesome because I got to try so many different beers that I hadn't really had the opportunity to try up until then. Almost every Friday, that's where I would do happy hour. And so that was where I tried, honestly, things from all around the world. But the one that really stuck out to me was Appalachian's Water Gap Wheat, because while I was open to trying all these different beers and all these different styles that had so many different flavor profiles, the Water Gap Wheat was just something that tasted familiar to me, I guess, to some extent, but better. And so I was like, whoa, all right. And I grew up in Harrisburg, and the label on the bottle was this beautiful, picturesque depiction of the Susquehanna River and the Water Gaps, which is right where I grew up. So I think it just kind of came full circle for me.
Cool. What got you interested in the business or production side of it?
I homebrewed off and on, a little bit here and there, mostly with friends and my brother occasionally. And then I went off into the corporate world and realized that was hell. And I did not want to do that. I was not cut out to be a yes man at all. And so I actually left corporate America and went to grad school. I went back to school for environmental science, which I have a master's in. Never did anything in that field. The entire time I was in grad school, I would joke around and say, wouldn't it be funny if I ended up in beer after all of this? And then lo and behold, I did.
Guess you weren't joking. So what was your first job in the beer world?
So first foray into beer professionally was when I worked at Keystone Homebrew Supply. I started there in the fall of 2013. At the time, this was sort of when some of the online retailers for homebrewers were still pretty small, and Keystone had a pretty decent presence. Not even just regionally and locally, it was nationwide. We did a lot of shipments to people all over the country, which is kind of cool. And so I started working there and just learning more and more and more. I had been homebrewing, but of course, if you're not always learning, like, what's the point? And then I got to know John Stemler, and he had previously worked at Keystone. He had left Keystone to start his own brewery, and he asked me one day if I wanted to start working part-time in the tap room, and I was like, okay, that sounds good. And then for the next 18 months, I bugged the shit out of them to hire me full-time, because I knew that I wanted to be a bigger, more integral role in brewery operations. And at that point, I actually wasn't entirely sure in what facet I wanted to be part of it more. I entertained the idea of sales, entertained the idea of marketing, and I entertained the idea of production. And then one day, John called me and said, "Hey, I want you to come be my brewer." And I said, "What? Are you sure? Me? Like, me? You're positive on that?" He was like, "Yeah, no, yes, you." I was like, "Oh, okay." So that was in July of 2015. So we're actually coming up on 6 years that I've been in the industry as a professional brewer. And then from there, I kind of just didn't look back.
You've hit some speed bumps along the way. One was an accident you had at the brewery.
In the end of February of 2016, I had a pretty gnarly brewing accident. Everybody thinks that brewing is this big, glamorous, lovely thing, and it's cool, don't get me wrong, but you're also dealing with a lot of really dangerous stuff. Vessels that are under pressure. You're dealing with hot liquids. You're dealing with really heavy pieces of equipment or just objects throughout the brewery. And then you also have all the chemicals that you're dealing with. So there's a lot of hazards within a brewery. And unfortunately, I am a tale to be told.
A cautionary tale.
Yeah, unfortunately. So I had a very large compressed nitrogen gas cylinder crush my right arm from here to here in February of 2016. And that did some pretty extensive damage. I broke a bunch of bones in my wrist. Most of it was soft tissue and nerve damage, which that nerve damage is like, that's the worst. So that was a lot of rehab. I mean, I had to learn how to use my arm all over again. I went through basically 6 months of rehab for them to then tell me that where they got me was as far as I was going to go. And if I wanted to be better, which they thought that I could, then I needed to have surgery. So I had surgery on my elbow and my ulnar nerve in November of 2016. By February of 2017, I managed to get back up on the brew deck. So it was 1 week shy of exactly a year from the date of the accident, which was pretty important to me that I make that happen, because there was a point where doctors and therapists and myself all kind of doubted that I might ever be able to do this again. So it was motivating because I'm hugely stubborn. If somebody tells me I can't do something, I'm going to prove you wrong and show you that I can do it. So that was kind of my motivation, was, okay, I'm going to get back up there before the 1 year anniversary, which at that point was, still only about 6 months out of my surgery. In hindsight, I probably should have waited a little bit, but I didn't get back to brewing full time for another several months.
What did they have you do in the meantime?
When I started at Freewill, I was doing both production and also social media marketing and events. And so after my accident, I just dove headfirst into doing events and social media marketing, and obviously couldn't do anything with production. My heart is ultimately in production. I love being able to have my hand in the product from start to finish. The satisfaction that comes from knowing that, I did this and I get to share that with somebody, like, that's really cool. Being able to walk into a tap room and see people drinking something that I've had a part in. They don't know me, I don't know them, but we're somehow sharing something and connected. The idea of having my hand in things and being connected to those products is, I wouldn't do it if it weren't for that. So being able to get back into the production seat was something that I was pretty adamant on doing.
So you work your way back to full-time on the brewing floor.
Yep.
And then you had a setback.
Yep, so I started brewing again and was really kind of diving headfirst into production once again, which felt awesome, because like I said, that's really where I want to be.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the surgery that I had the first time actually has a pretty high failure rate, which I knew going into it, but at the same time I was still willing to do it because I just wanted any sense of relief. Fast forward, by the beginning of 2019, it had failed and the nerve bundle had slid back out of place. And so for the next several months, I was just trying to survive. It's pretty uncomfortable. If anybody's dealt with nerve pain, you might understand the level of discomfort that just can come out of nowhere, and how hugely distracting it is, and how much chronic pain truly changes a person and really affects you, not just physically, but mentally too, and emotionally. The orthopedist that I saw sent me to go see a specialist, and they were like, okay, I think we are gonna need this surgery again, but we're gonna do it a little bit differently, and hopefully this time it won't fail. So now I just have 2 scars in the same place, but one's longer. So that's my badass scar brewing world stuff, cautionary tale.
So you have the second surgery and you're recovering when the pandemic hits.
So I had the second surgery December 2nd of 2019, and so I was out on medical leave, basically just focusing on rehabbing and getting my strength back, getting my dexterity back in my hand. Honestly, again, learning how to use my hand, learning how to lift things, learning where my limits were at this point. And then the pandemic hit, and I was like, well, you know, kind of actually been practicing for this for the last 3 months because I've been at home. And, you know, I think everybody thought it was just gonna last 2 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months. And then it just kept going on and on and on. And it got to the point where I had rehabbed to a point that my surgeon was ready to release me and clear me to go back to work. And so here we are a couple months into the pandemic, and things are shut down, and I didn't really have a position to go back to because everybody was cutting workforce. And you know, when you have a brewery that is so dependent on those retail sales to the public, and you can't do that, it kind of puts a hurting on things.
To say it sucks would be an understatement. How did you handle it?
That was heartbreaking, and that was hard. But I also kind of looked at it as, okay, well, I just came off of 6 months of really being able to focus on myself mentally and emotionally, and do a lot of healing from all the things that had happened with the trauma of this. And I took the time to really dive into looking at communication patterns, learning how to be a better communicator with people, learning how to be a better leader and a better follower, because sometimes I can be so stubborn to the point that I don't necessarily want to get in line, and so there's lessons in that. Learning different levels of humility and you know, all the things that I've strived to want to learn and to know and to be better at, but I think always had other outside distractions to pull me away from being able to do that. And so I don't know, I took that 6 months of being away from everything and said, okay, I'm gonna come out of this being a better person. I'm gonna come out of this being a better human. And on the other side of it, I kind of got pushed off a cliff and was like, okay, here we go. But you know what? I'm now armed with all of these things that I didn't have 6 months ago. I'm in a better place emotionally and mentally, and I just have to trust that the universe is not gonna let me fall 100% on my face.
Yeah, but the universe didn't let you fall on your face. You know, one door closed and another opened. You know, millions of people are unemployed, and you find yourself with a new gig.
I did, yes.
So how did you land at Naked Brewing?
So ownership is Jim Crossland and Sean Dooley. I've known both of them for several years, but Sean, I have known her for a lot longer. We're both members of Pink Boots Society, and just through different connections and interactions and events and things like that, she and I have become really good friends over the years. And so when I found myself suddenly a free agent, as I kind of put it out there, I was like, hey, I'm suddenly a free agent. I only reached out to a few select people initially about it because I didn't really know where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do. It was just, you know, the whole world was in a state of uncertainty, honestly. So I'd reach out to Sean, and she said, actually, funny story. I might have something open here for you. Let's talk in a few days. And I said, okay. And so pretty much within a day or two, she had reached back out to me and said, let's sit down and talk. Fast forward 4 weeks, and I started at Naked as the head brewer on July 1st of 2020.
That's awesome.
That was cool. That was really cool. I didn't think that I would be coming out of having major surgery that had sidelined me again, but I didn't think that I'd be coming out of that as a head brewer. That was kind of trippy, actually.
It's a big jump.
And I had been sidelined. I mean, I had been out of any any brewery production altogether. At that point, I mean, it had been 7 months, 8 months. You know, I started thinking like, am I even gonna remember how to do this? Am I even gonna remember what means what? And turns out I didn't. And muscle memory, or whatever you wanna call it, kicked back in like that. It really wasn't as, I mean, yes, it was a very steep learning curve, but it wasn't as much that I thought that I had forgotten. So, I don't know, it was, yeah, but it's me.
Let's talk about Naked Brewing, and I guess we should start with the name.
So Naked as a company was founded in 2010, and they chose the name for several different reasons. One, at that point, they were still brewing on a very small scale system. They were using well water. They were using as much local grain. They both grew hops, and so they were using a lot of the hops that they were growing. And so it was kind of just like this stripped down thing, right? So it's naked, but also Jim's background is, believe it or not, actually in psychology. And so he kind of took the whole idea of naked meaning the lack of ego, and that like, hey, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, we're not gonna be pretentious about it. It's just beer. It's just beer.
Besides making Google searches interesting, the name does make things tricky, especially in naming beers.
As you can imagine, there have been over the years a lot of tongue-in-cheek and very risque, borderline inappropriate names, references, because, you know, people hear the word naked and they automatically like, ha 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 ha, you know, you return back to being like 7 again and like, I am 100% pro nudity and whatever. I'm pro women embracing their bodies how they choose to, pro men embracing their bodies how they choose to. What I am not in favor of is things that are said or done to objectify someone, whether they are male or female or non-binary, however they choose to identify. I'm a big fan of inclusion, and the quickest way to not make somebody feel included is to ostracize them or make fun of them or
belittle them.
Really, and that's not who I am. That's not who I am as a person, and that's not who I am as a brewer. Being a 50% woman-owned company, and at this point when I came on board, 100%, for lack of everything else, 100% woman-run, production-based, that was not going to be something that sat well with me. And they knew that. They knew that part of bringing me on board was going to be the fact that, like, them as ownership and me joining, so us collectively as a team, we're all better than that. We don't need to stoop to a level of sexualizing everything. And again, I am pro-sex workers. Like, I'm for all of that, but I think that there's a time and a place where that is appropriate. To me, beer is not the appropriate place for that, especially because it's something that lowers people's inhibitions, right? And so if you are already presenting something in a way that says that it's acceptable to say, speak, or view a person a certain way, and you use a lubricant that lowers their inhibitions, I just feel like it's not doing anybody any good.
Agreed, and a lot of the double entendres are just tacky.
Right. Can I get on board with some of those jokes in the right place, in the right format, around the right people? Sure. When I came on board, I am pretty lucky in this regard, actually. They gave me virtually 100% creative freedom and said, you can get rid of any recipe, you can keep any recipe, or you can change any recipe that you want. That was exciting, also terrifying. The only beer that I had to make sure stayed in production, but I could change it, was the Buck Naked Cream Ale. And I was fine with that name for several different reasons. One, we're on Buck Road. The name of our brewery is Naked, so Buck Naked is funny. It's also not really that inappropriate.
No.
And we're in Bucks County, and you know, there's multiple different ways that, to me, that name was okay. Cream ale being my favorite style of all time, of course I was like, hell yeah. If that's literally the only beer that I have to keep in production at all times, did I just die and go to cream ale heaven? Like,
And it's a good business decision for those people who walk in and ask what the closest to Coors Light is.
And that's exactly what it is. It's a gateway beer, but it's also an always appropriate anytime beer. It's the kind of beer that you don't have to think about when you're drinking it. It's simple, it's easy, it's refreshing, it is what it is. So I tweaked the recipe a little bit, but it's what's here on tap all the time, and it is our #1 selling beer.
Sweet, so you basically got to start from scratch with the beers, and that included the naming.
When somebody gives you the keys to the palace, you take advantage of it. And I kind of was just like, okay, I'm moving the fuck in. So here we go. One of the things that I really took a stance on and dug my heels in was on naming things. Fortunately, I had 100% support from ownership, and they agreed. At this point, it was 2020, and there were a lot of social inequities that were coming to light, and rightfully so. And it was sort of just like, let's get the fuck on board. Let's actually be voices of change and use beer as a platform, and we don't have to be loud and boisterous about it. We don't have to make all sorts of public statements, but let's use what we are currently doing and make that a more inclusive environment. Names were sort of one of the first things, and then as we decided that we were going to start canning, label art was another thing that I was pretty adamant be inclusive, and Sean and I both really spearheaded the first parts of that endeavor, and obviously we're both still very much involved in the label design, and that's always sort of been something that we both have said, let's do this right and not make it something that anybody feels called out on or not included by, because there's so many subtle things that can happen when you're looking at visual art, even wording. So let's really take a good long hard look at that and make sure that we're doing our part to make beer something that is for everybody.
That's great. Before the pandemic, I don't remember seeing Naked Brewing that much around in the Philly area. Was most of it sold in-house?
Because I wasn't here, they did distribute to a lot of local bars and restaurants and even into Philly, but yeah, most of it was taproom generated retail sales, draft only. There were no cans, so it was, draft, crowlers and growlers as your to-go options.
How big is the brewery?
So the system itself is an oversized 7.5 barrel system. I love that system so much. I pet my mash tun every day before we mash in. We have a little one-on-one talk, and I love that mash tun. I love the system. I can actually knock out of the kettle just under 10 barrels. So like I said, it's an oversized system. The fermenters are 15-barrel fermenters. Weird things about starting in the middle of a pandemic for a company that you've never worked for before is you have absolutely no fucking clue what to expect or what's going on or what sales are going to be like, or if you're even going to be allowed to have people, or God only knows what. Like, there's a lot of questions.
From a brewing standpoint, how do you plan for it?
Most of the batches that I've been brewing, I've done as single batches and not doubled and brewed 15 barrels of the same beer. Several different reasons. One, pandemic related. Two, the time when the system was purchased and the size fermenters were purchased and decided on, it was a much different time in general. This was a distribution model in terms of kegs and draft. So it made sense to brew 15 barrels of a single beer, knowing that half of it was going to go out your door, out your loading dock to your wholesaler, and the other half was going to be for your taproom direct-to-consumer sales. Things change, and the industry in general changes. The trends change, what consumers want, what they expect, and risk of sounding super bold, what consumers demand. Is they always want fresh, they want new, they don't want to come in and see the same tap list every single time. Now, if they're here relatively close together, they might see some of the same beers, but they don't want to come back in a month later and see the same 8 to 10 beers on tap.
Right.
When they brought me on board, another big thing that I dug my heels in, I guess, was, I think maybe we should reevaluate that and look to be keeping things fresh and changed over relatively frequently. And you know what? Somebody comes in and they really loved a beer and they come back 2 weeks later and it's gone and they say, oh man, I really like that beer. Sorry. You know what? Sorry. I don't know what to tell you, but that's just the nature of the business.
You want to keep them engaged with different beers. You got a lot of competition in the area. And if they get bored with the same stuff, they're going to go somewhere else.
Exactly. So yeah, we've sort of revamped the business model, and in a weird way, the pandemic kind of allowed for this change to happen, where the previous brewer left, the business model sort of deviated from where it had been and sort of changed to being more pertinent and relevant to today's craft beer market. And we moved into being able to sell cans too, and kind of did it with this whole new perspective on things that I think hopefully others view it this way, but I think was sort of a fresh new take on what this brand is and can be. Something that is known for having a really diverse tap list. We have an ESB and a cream ale on right now, but we also have we have 2 fruited kettle sours on. We have a blonde stout with banana and coffee and chocolate and lactose in it. We have a traditional West Coast IPA, we have a hazy IPA, we have a milkshake IPA, like we have all sorts of things. I like doing that. I think it's cool.
You guys are located in Huntington Valley. What's it like there?
So we're in this weird, tiny little sliver of our zip code, 19006. If you were to look on a map that breaks it down by zip codes, we're in this sliver that is, it is so tiny. The rest of the zip code is actually in Montgomery County, but we're barely inside of Bucks County, because County Line Road is, I could throw a stone to it. While yes, it is our address, and that's what I tell people, we're actually more, I think it's more accurate to say that we're in like Trevose, Feasterville area. And actually, Northeast Philly is about 3 minutes down that way, where it intersects with Street Road.
And how about your customer base?
This area in particular, like geographically where the brewery is located, we have the weirdest cross-section of craft beer consumers here, where again, our number one selling beer is cream ale. There had never been a fruited kettle sour or a new age sour on tap here. And I was like, let's do that. In my mind, because so much of the rest of the craft beer world is so jazzed up over these, I just kind of assumed that like people would understand what they were, they would get it, they would geek out over it, and they would want them all the time. And at first, our customer basis, I think, just didn't know what to do with them. They were like, I like this, but I'm really unsure about this. And there was like this whole level of hesitancy and some trepidation that went with it into exploring some of these new beers and these new styles that I was bringing. But I looked at this opportunity as like, okay, cool. So there's a built-in customer basis that has been here since almost day one. Most of those people come from 5 to 10 mile radius of here, right? And I looked at it and I said, yeah, but there's a whole wide world outside of that 10 mile radius and I want them. I'm hungry for that. So the beers that I proposed to start putting into production were beers that I hoped the uber local customer basis would latch onto, but it was also the beers that I knew people would, once they were trying and getting the word out, they would start actually traveling for them. It just was a matter of, is there time? And in the middle of a pandemic, time is not on your side.
That's an understatement.
Things were, not easy, as they weren't for any small business, any business, actually. There was a lot of, okay, how are we gonna make this work? Fortunately, one of my strong suits is looking at things and going, okay, how can I work within the confines of what I have without sacrificing the integrity of the brand, the integrity of the beer, or the reputation of myself or the brewery? And you make it work and you figure it out.
Much like many smaller breweries, when the pandemic started, you were primarily draft only. Now you're primarily packaged.
So it was always my goal when I started here. They didn't know this, not initially anyway. It was my goal to get things into cans. They had never canned before, but I was like, we're gonna do this. I just had to figure out how and when to make that move, keep pushing, keep putting that bug in their ear and say, yeah, I think we need to transition to cans. And I came in on a Monday and Sean said, we're gonna start canning. And I was like, Well, that was a fuck ton easier than I thought it was going to be. Okay, I guess I don't have to convince you that this is a good idea then.
If only it was always that easy. So how were you able to make that turn?
We bought a small little 2-head counter pressure tabletop canner. It's very, very, very labor intensive. Jim does the majority of the canning on the weekends after he's worked his full-time job during the week. And you know, he has 3 children and Sean has 3 children, and so they're balancing a lot. Operating a small business isn't enough heartache and stress. Operating a small business in the middle of a pandemic and hiring a new brewer, that's a whole other level of stress.
That stress didn't stop them from opening a second location during the pandemic.
Yeah, so our second location is in Bristol Borough, so I didn't know too much about Bristol prior to me starting here, but Bristol has a really strong sense of community. It's right on the Delaware River. It's a very historical town, and they're really proud of their town. Like, it's a community that is consistently celebrating the town and the businesses and things within it. So we opened a tap room about a block from the marina, which is really cool. There's huge public parking lot, municipal parking lot right behind the tap room, and it's in this cool historical building right in downtown Bristol. Because it's a community that is very focused on supporting its local businesses, we were pretty fortunate to have some almost instantaneous business from people that were just like, ooh, a tap room, a brewery, let's go visit. We didn't really do any big public announcement of when we opened, mostly because it really was in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, it was September or October of last year, and the guidelines were changing all the time, and so we didn't want to plan to do this taproom thing or this release of something and then, 12 hours later find out that they were shutting everything down again. So we were kind of quiet about it. But yeah, it's in this cool spot. There's a vodka distillery that's gonna be opening up a tasting room, and then I think another distillery, plus Dad's Hat is in Bristol. No, they're not right in the borough, but they are in Bristol. So there's a lot of stuff to kind of make it a destination.
Fantastic. Well, I know you weren't there then. What did Naked Brewing do when the pandemic first struck?
So when the pandemic hit, they actually shut down altogether. They got all the beer out of tanks and packaged into kegs, but they stopped production altogether. I think they just didn't know what to do. It was kind of the safety of employees and consumers and the ever-changing guidelines, that didn't exactly set facilities up to be successful when you didn't already have a package format that was cans or bottles. So they shut down for a while. Then they slowly were opening up a little bit to doing pre-order, like online orders for crowlers and growlers.
What was it like to step into this job in the middle of all of this?
When I started, nobody had brewed in 3 months or more. And I walked into a completely cold brew house, taught myself the system and figured it out and haven't looked back.
Great. How was switching gears for you? At Free Will, you were a production brewer and you had Stemler overseeing, what was going on and coming up with the recipes. And there you were also part of a team. So you had others, helping make the decisions and doing the purchasing and the artwork and everything. Now you're the one who has to come up with the ideas and brew everything.
Right, yeah, I'm the boss bitch here.
Yes, you are.
John is one of my dearest friends and really helped guide me through that time of uncertainty. Even before I knew officially what was happening, I confided a lot in him, and he really was just super supportive because, of course, I was filled with all this self-doubt. One of the things that he said to me was, you need to not be afraid to fail because failure is actually not a bad thing. It's a learning opportunity, and you're never going to fail completely as long as you are looking at this from a positive and advantageous perspective. And so I said, okay, that sounds good. And then he said, you also have a lot of people that are in your network. Lean into them. Ask questions. I'm here to help you. I will answer any questions you have. I will take all of your phone calls. I'll come down there with you and walk you through things if you have questions. As I started to sort of feel a little bit more comfortable as my start date was approaching, I was like, yeah, you're right. I can do this. I have people that will help me. And also, Hannah, stop doubting yourself. Like, you know what the fuck you're doing. Stop doubting yourself.
Yeah, but it's natural to doubt yourself. Most people do. Especially when, the role you stepped into was a lot, because everything that comes into that back room is solely on you.
100%. I was just talking to one of my girlfriends yesterday. She and her husband own The Seed, which is a new brewery that just opened in Atlantic City. And Amanda's the head brewer, and she's just amazing. And I was talking to her about how anxious I get just doing a grain order. I come to find out, like, I'm not alone in that. She freaks out about it, and she's been brewing for longer than I have been. But it's just that reality that, like, shit, did I order the right stuff? Did I order enough? Did I order too little? Did I order too much? I'm trying to run lean, but I don't want to run too lean. And, like, did I forget about a beer that I had on the production schedule? And then does it make sense for me to place an order just for that? Like, the amount of anxiety that goes into that, that's just one aspect of it. Like, that's just the grain. But it was actually kind of reaffirming to know that I'm not entirely alone, because, for years you watch other people within the company that you work for seamlessly transition into being able to sit down and order grain and write a recipe and do this and that and do a full-on production schedule. And meanwhile, I'm going, ah!
So what's next for Naked Brewing?
So what's next? Let's just survive until we're fully through all this pandemic stuff. Keep supporting small businesses, because we need you still. Just because we're seemingly on the other side of things doesn't mean that the last year and however many months haven't put a pretty big hurting on everything else. So we're going to be opening up another retail location within Bristol in the same building, just sort of expanding. So that's underway. Yeah, that's kind of what's next. There's be some cool beers coming out, and looking forward to getting back to being able to do collaborations again and seeing people in person. And yeah, just being able to have people in the tap room, that's been pretty cool. Being able to see people sit at the bar, I've never seen that from this perspective, right? The first day that I walked out from the other side of the wall and saw people sitting at the bar, I was like, holy shit, there's people sitting at the bar. Oh my God.
It hadn't crossed my mind that you'd never seen customers at the bar there.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't seen that, because I started in the middle when you couldn't do any of that.
This is the time that I normally would ask if you'd seen any silver linings during the pandemic, but it's pretty obvious you have.
As shitty as 2020 was for a lot of people and businesses, there was a lot of opportunity and growth that happened for me personally. And I think that to some extent, it gave this company an opportunity to sort of reassess the direction that they were moving and be able to change trajectories. The fortunate thing about being the size that we are is that we can do that pivot a little bit more easily than a larger scale brewery.
Great, well, that's it. Thanks for spending all this time with me today.
Cool, thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye. If you'd like to learn more about the Naked Brewing Company, you can check out their website. The link's in the video's description. And if you find yourself near Huntingdon Valley or Bristol, pop into one of their tap rooms for a couple of beers. This is the last interview of the season. A big thanks to all the folks who have been on the show or lent a hand along the way. And to everybody who's watched, I appreciate all of your support. But remember, while the pandemic seems like it's mostly behind us, for many of these small businesses, there's still a lot left to do in order to recover. So be patient and help out where you can. Thanks, and I'll see you soon.